to go live for me.
Okie dokes.
Right, live, and then need to get that picture up. Okay. All good. Right, that link should be with you now.
And it is, so clicking on that. All right. Okay, I can see you, that doesn't matter, does it?
No, so I'm going to click to your screen now, so you'll...
And I'm going to freeze it anyway.
Yep. So
that's frozen. And it's muted on that side.
That's perfect.
I think we're all right on that. Yeah, muted. Yeah, that's good.
All right, perfect. So bear with me a second. I just want to get the thumbnail out so it's ready to go out to our viewers. Save there. There should be a comment. Hi, Mike, in the comments there.
Can you see I can see that. Yes, indeed.
Right. So bear with us, guys. If you're regulars on these Q&As, as you know, it takes a couple of minutes for me to get this out to social media. But Roy, what's been happening since last time you spoke, which was in 2019?
Yeah, isn't it just all that time that's gone by? Well, obviously in this last year or so, I've been buttoning down the hatches and staying safe, really. And now that I'm retired, it hasn't been too much of a hassle or too much of a shock. But yeah, no, it does seem. I didn't think it would be as long as that since we last spoke face to face at Church Fenton. That was that 2 years ago. Good grief!
Yeah, it does seem a long time ago, doesn't it? Bloody hell.
Yeah.
Hi David in the comments there. So better with us, guys. So how's your day been so far? What have you been up to?
Just fairly straightforward, really. I've been trying to fight the losing battle of sorting the garage out. Our garage is no different from many other people's in as much as it accumulates rubbish. No matter how hard you try, it just breeds rubbish, and we're trying to make space to put more rubbish in, to be honest, that's coming out.
Yeah. I mean,
it's just the way it is.
Yeah, at the weekend, I had to clear out of my office, and I was like, why did I keep that? There's like so much things, but yeah, I think that's just part and parcel. Yeah, there'll be, probably another week, there'll be things I'll put in. I'll be like, why have I got that there again? Right, so I'm getting this out now, folks, to our social media site. So I think we're on time at the moment, so can bear with us. It's going out on Twitter. Are you actually on Twitter, Roy?
Yes, but it's not something I use very much, to be honest. It's like Instagram's another thing that I've got an account and I've never used it. Everybody else uses it all the time.
Yeah, I think that's a good call. Yeah, like Twitter's not really like my favorite place to be, but yeah, it's there. Right, and I got all these links out. Yeah, so welcome all in the chat. But yeah, Roy, while I get these out, if you can give us a couple of minutes summary of your RAF career, that would be great. I mean, people have probably watched the interview already, but good to get the question, your background, so people can get the questions in.
Yeah, sure. Well, welcome to everybody that's joining us today. I'm Roy Macintyre, had 36 years in the Air Force, which came to an end in November 2018. For 23 years of that, I was an air defence pilot. Started on Phantoms, 43 Squadron at Lookers, about 8 miles west of where to the east of where I am now, and then moved after a short tour on to the Tornado F3. I was one of the first aircrew that set up the new 11 Squadron at Leeming in 88, and had a short tour there, and then moved across to the Red Eagles 23 Squadron at Leeming, which also included the first Gulf War. When I came home from that, I was posted down to Coningsby to 229 OCU as an instructor pilot, and was there for a number of years doing getting various qualifications, culminating in completing the Qualified Weapons Instructors course. And having finished that, I was then posted across the taxiway to the F3 Operational Evaluation Unit. I had 4 years there, which was very interesting indeed. At the end of that, I was back to Lookers in 97, and I joined 43 Squadron again as their QY pilot. And then from then until 2009, I was 43, Treble 1, and 56, which had come up from Coningsby as the OCU, and I finished up on the Stanival flight, monitoring all the other squadrons. Last flight was in February 09, fly past at Stirling. And then after that, I became a QFI and was flying on the University Air Squadron through Glasgow, and as well as the one east of Scotland over at Lookers, which was great fun to be able to continue flying. And I managed to do that for all of my 36 years. I never did a ground tour, wasn't really interested in going up the ranks. And finishing, as I say, in November 2018. And now I am a man of leisure when my wife lets me. There we go.
Brilliant. But while the questions are coming in, so get them in on the side now, guys. And Roy will be happy to answer them. But I'm going to get one in here. Is it true you're actually the highest timed F3 pilot?
Yes, that is correct. My logbook's behind me, but I think you've got the figures anyway. It's 4,500 and something or other. Because I didn't have a ground tour. That's really what it's about. I mean, you could be glib and say they couldn't get rid of me, and I just kept hanging around. But yes, I was the only pilot to get above 4,000 hours. There was a navigator, a good friend of mine from New Zealand. He actually got 200 hours more than me, but we were the closest to getting to 5,000. But I always say that navigators' hours don't count, In the back.
Then I was one like that.
Now, that's it. It's
brilliant
on the internet, and I'll be in trouble.
Brilliant. So guys, get your questions coming in. But as you can see there, Roy, on the side, so I'm just going to let you loose and enjoy. And if you need me, just give me a shout. But enjoy, folks.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I'm looking down, and MKMD, Exploration and Paranormal's asking, what was my first impression of the thrust reverse and using it for the first time in the F3? That was very impressive, is the short answer. It's one of the key attributes that the F3 had designed into it, and indeed the GR1, the ability to land on a short distance. And we're thinking damaged runways and stuff like that. So the thrust reverse, very similar to what is used on airliners, but can be quite powerful. It was possible to land with it pre-armed, and that is ready to go as soon as the micro switches on the main landing gear touched the runway and the micro switches were made, the buckets could come out. You could get yourself into trouble if you were a little bit too aggressive, because of course the next thing that's going to happen is the nose is going to swing downwards onto the runway, and you could give the nose wheel quite a heavy clatter. But if you did it properly, and the brakes, which were not brilliant, but they did have an anti-skid system, anti-lock, you could in theory land with your feet hard on the brakes, pre-armed thrust reverse, and as soon as the nose was down, you'd have the throttles coming up, and you could stop in about 1,500 feet. The tyres weren't very happy, the brakes weren't very happy, but the aircraft was stopped. So if that's all you had on the runway, it would do the job. But routinely, we would use it pretty much the same as you'd feel in an airliner, to be honest. There's no point in smoking the tyres. And the other thing, the ground crew didn't like it because, of course, the fins got really mucky. And eventually somebody had to go up there with a bucket and brush, and it wasn't me. So I used to get it in the air for too much with the thrust reverse. But it was very good, very effective, and hardly ever went wrong. Right. And again, MKMD asking again, how was Gulf War 1 in the F3? We were still relatively early, and there was a toss-up at high command as to whether the Phantom or the F3 was going to be deployed. And I think there was a lot of politics involved, that they couldn't be seen not to have the new aircraft going to war. The Phantoms went out, I'm sure a lot of you know, were deployed from Germany to cover Cyprus in case it all got really ugly. But I think there was a political imperative to get the aircraft out to theatre and be operational. The ones that we took in September of 90 were delayed somewhat because they were taken from 43 Squadron because of the new aircraft, and they were given all the things that we would expect to have had right at the start. All the defensive aids and a few extra bits and pieces added on. So we're delayed going out. So the aircraft, though, were in a reasonable shape. And I was happy to be there in the F3 as opposed to the Phantom. I was there during Desert Shield. So it was purely defensive. We never went across into Iraq. It was purely manning the front line, which was the Saudi border. Because at that time, we didn't know what Saddam's intentions were. He had taken Kuwait. Is he going to roll straight into Saudi Arabia? That's why we were there. We were out for 3 months. We were just patrolling up and down, and there was all sorts of things going out. It was our turn to come home just before Christmas. 4329 combo went out, and they got involved in the shooting war. So that was really Gulf War 1 for me. But the aircraft did all right, particularly because we were down at lower levels. Hot air, hot atmosphere, not good for jet engine performance. But when you're operating below 10,000 feet, the aircraft did all right. Yeah, it did all right. Okay. Rich was asking, what was that on the Grob Tutor? That's the aircraft that the University Air Squadrons use. Currently grounded at the moment for reasons I'm not 100% of, but something to do with the rudder. But it's on a lease, and it's on a contract run by Babcock, and it's what all the University Air Squadrons use, and also some of the elementary flying training is still being done on it, although the prefect, I think, is taking over. Nice little aeroplane, aerobatic, very simple, starts like a car, great fun to fly. And Rubinator wants to know, why is SUAS better than UGSAS? Well, here we go. I'm going to make enemies straight away. I enjoyed both the squadrons. UGSAS flying out of Glasgow Airport, that's kind of unique. And the students get their RT skills up to speed very quickly because you're in the middle of under normal, normal circumstances, you're in the middle of a big international airport. In fact, I can tell you a story. I remember my first week there, and I taxied off the runway and paused to let the student do the after landing checks. And then I got a call from Glasgow Ground, uniform 47, can you expedite, please? The Emirates is waiting for you. At which point I looked up, and there is a Boeing 777 of Emirates Airlines, pushed back, engine started, wanting to taxi. But he was being held to let my little Grob go through. And I thought, that's fine. Yep. Back, stand back. RAF officer coming through, thank you. And so we went. It's the only time it ever happened. After that, we were shunted into the side and we knew our place. But that was UGSAS. SUAS, I've always been 43 Squadron through and through since I was a kid. Leuchars, my home base. Enjoyed flying from there, and of course I was getting to be at home again with my family. But University Air Squadrons are University Air Squadrons. They're all the same, great fun, and just occasionally can raise your heartbeats when you're flying with a student. Usually occurs around about 5 feet above the runway when he or she's trying to land on it. But other than that, it was great fun. It was great fun. 67 Tomcat. Was the F3 retired too soon? Didn't seem like it was in service for more than 2 decades. True. And again, there's a lot of politics. There's always politics in military aviation, military full stop, and none more so with the F3. A lot of things that could have been done with the F3 that could have made it quite a potent weapons platform for many more years. The airframes were being managed for fatigue, so there wasn't a problem there. What was pushing it off the stage, of course, was Typhoon and the political clout that came with it. Won't be able to go into too many details about what was potentially there, but it was in the press anyway. The EF3, so the F3 fitted with alarm missiles and using its RHWR and some modifications to the radar, which again I can't really go into. It was a superior SEAD platform to the Tornado GR4. Definitely. There's no argument. I can tell you that without getting into classified area. That caused a political storm because the hierarchy were protecting the GR4 and therefore the EF3 was killed at birth, which is a shame. There was a number of other things that could have gone on. So I think it was potentially retired too soon. You get into the factor of, can they afford to run X number of F3s with an increasing number of Typhoons as well? Money comes into it, perhaps not. And so I think it was going from the political and the financial side. But from an operational point of view, I think there was life in the old dog yet, as they say. Right, Brockwell Lane. Did the swing wing take some getting used to on the F3? A little bit. It's quite easy to explain the situation we ended up in with the Tornado F3 and swing wing. It's an exact parallel to a car with a manual gearbox or an automatic gearbox. Someday, if you've driven both, you'll know that it's far easier to drive an automatic transmission, and you don't have to concentrate as much. And that's exactly the same principle in the F3. The problem was when we got the F3, the engineers didn't have a sufficiently robust model to measure the fatigue when the automatics were being used, and you can deselect them, or you could. So the only time I actually flew with an automatic wings sweep and maneuver devices enabled was when I picked up, on the 2 occasions I got to go to Wharton to pick up a brand new jet, which was great. It's like going into a BMW showroom and saying, yes, I'll have that one, thank you very much. You climb in, 2 hours on the jet, take it home, great. But when it got to Coningsby for the acceptance checks, because we had the engineering hierarchy had this problem of monitoring the fatigue properly, it was disabled. So we flew it manually. So yet we learned really from the get-go to use manual wing sweep. We just had to memorize a set of numbers, speeds, maximum and minimum. But the principle is exactly the same as driving a car with a manual gearbox. To get the best out of the car, you need to be in the correct gear. And for us, to get the best performance out of the aircraft, whether you're trying to turn or whether you're trying to go fast, you need to have the wings in the correct place. So my left hand, instead of moving a gear stick, was moving the wing sweep, but it's exactly the same principle. The downside of it was it took extra brain power. And those aircraft that went to Saudi Arabia, they accepted the fact that fatigue wasn't going to be measured properly, and they had automatic wing sweep and maneuver devices enabled all the time. Personally speaking, I think a half decent pilot could get more out of the aircraft using manual wing sweep and manual maneuver devices. By that I mean the maneuver slats and flaps. The penalty of getting them in the wrong place means you've got poor performance, or at worst, the very first fatal accident of the F3 back in 89, I think it was because the pilot got their wing sweep badly wrong and they crashed. So it did take some effort, but once you got there, I think you got more out the aircraft, to be honest. Lonnie Martin, have I ever stalled a Tornado with the wings back, folded back, and how do you recover? Lonnie, I honestly didn't look at that question until right now, but I'll just go back to what I've just said about the first fatal accident in the F3. It was out over the North Sea. It was a 23 Squadron aircraft. Somebody out there will know what the serial number was. I can't remember. It was acting as a target, and he was running away from an intercepting F3. And basically, he was quite slow, but only about 250 feet above the water. Went to full reheat to accelerate, and to help it, he just went straight back to 67 wing. 67 fully swept, 67 degrees gives you minimum drag, so quickest acceleration, but it loses all its lift. And what happened was the aircraft started to sink. The pilot just pulled back on the stick, and we got into exactly what you've just asked, which is it stalled. Now, the Tornado had some incident limiting systems on it which prevented a departure, but you could stall it quite easily, just as you can do with any other aircraft. And unfortunately, in this particular case, there wasn't enough height left, and the aircraft bellied into the water. The back seater ejected, and the front seater was killed by the impact. So it's something we then practiced up at height, obviously, for all the pilots coming through, to show them what would happen if you got the wings back too quickly, too slow, i.e. you've lost your lift and the engines haven't got the aircraft moving forward fast enough to give you that lift back. At height, you would be a sitting duck in combat, but at low level, it's deadly, as we've just said. So it became a regular training event so that pilots were aware of it and could recognize the stall. And it comes back to this discipline of actually knowing how to use the manual wing sweep. Of course, if it had been automatic, wouldn't have happened. So there's another point. Should we have gone down that road or not? Right. Bill W. Saw the Panavia Tornado fly over my school in 1974. Well, that must have been pretty much one of the prototypes. Not sure where your school was, but if you're down northern England somewhere, it probably came out of Wharton near Preston, and that would have been the GR, the ground attack variant. When would the F3 start to appear? It would certainly be 79, I think, the first prototype of the air defence variant came. So 74 were definitely ground attack mud movers. Don't talk about them. You've got another question there, Bill. I'm not sure. Was the multi-role Combas? I'm not quite sure what that is. I'll maybe come back to that. Yogi, what formation would you fly on interception or QRA? QRA tended to be singletons unless there was a number of aircraft coming round the Cape or whatever in a group. So they would tend to launch one with the second one ready to go and maybe join up. So formation on QRA was pretty rare, except when you're up alongside the tanker. Out on a typical intercept mission, we could go off in close formation off the runway. We might go off on trail, depending on the weather. If it was 10 or 20 seconds, if it was a nice day. If it was going to be into cloud, then that could be extended to 30 seconds or maybe even into a minute or two if we were uncertain of being able to tie on with the radar. Generally speaking, though, we might be close formation till we get out into the operating area, and then we move out into battle. Americans call it spread, mile and a half, and oh God, it's so long now since I've done it. I'm going to say leaders on the right, wingman on the left. And if we were a 4, you could have them with somebody sitting on my wing. So the number 3 out to my left by about a mile and a half with number 4, or 3 and 4 could be about a mile to 2 miles behind us in card, because we're making the 4 points of a rectangle. Loads of formations that we could use depending on the job. We want, the whole point is we want to be trying to be as flexible and responsive as we can. Close in formation, you're not responsive. If you ever have seen the Red Arrows and Blue Angels and Thunderbirds, etc., very careful manoeuvring when you have aircraft in that close. Tactically, you're a sitting duck. So we tend to be as wide apart as we can to give us flexibility to manoeuvre, but not so wide that we don't have cross cover and mutual support, as we call it. Right, 67 Tomcat. Any red flag exercises, exercise stories that you can share? I did a couple of red flags. One of them was at night, so that was a bit of an eye-opener. By that stage, we were using Link 16 JTID's data link, fully NVG. So we were in reasonable shape. The rules still had to be quite strict in terms of keeping everybody safe. And unfortunately, an F-16 driver of a certain nation obviously got confused about the rules or chose to ignore them. And between myself and my wingman, as we were way out, getting up towards Tonopah, suddenly these lights just came through. And at night, it's difficult to tell how far away we were, 200-300 feet, maybe. And it's gone, past. And we're left thinking, what the was that? And it then came out, mission terminate, and this F-16 had barreled right through the middle of us. And it certainly brought it home that how quickly a well-organised training exercise can suddenly turn into something quite nasty. Red flags were brilliant. The ones I got involved with were very good, fun, hard work. Just as hard work getting in and out of Nellis, because there's 50 odd aircraft all trying to get back in or out at the same time. Very restrictive airspace, including the bit in the middle that we're not allowed to talk about, that you can see from all points of the range. It's hypnotic. I kept staring at it to see if I see some aliens getting airborne. No. But no, very good, very good. But the biggest disappointment for me was the debriefs. I found the way that the host nation conducted the debriefs was very protracted and laborious, and they missed the learning points quite a bit because there was an awful lot of egos that got in the way, and people didn't want to be shown up in front of. But well worth it, and I'm sure the Typhoon boys are getting loads out of it as well, and Lightning crews as well to come. So red flag is good. Again, with you 67, what squadrons were you with? Which was the best? Well, I've already said 11, 23, 43, 56, 65 on the OCU, and treble 1. 43 squadron. Have I got anything around me at the moment? No, it doesn't show off, but 43 is always was. If you asked me when I was a kid, 10 years old, when I was 10 years old, what did I want to be? I wanted to be a pilot in 43 squadron. Simple. Not join the Air Force, not be a pilot. I didn't see any of those problems. I was going to go straight to 43. I was extremely lucky that my first tour was as a pilot on 43, and there were flying Phantoms at the time. So I think I've got black and white checkered blood. Yeah. Hans, did you ever operate out of Stornoway? And if so, how was that? Yes, I have done on a couple of occasions with the Phantom and the Tornado. Bare bones, I think is the term. It's a bare bones base, so not a lot of facilities. They did have the hard standings put out there, and they were going to build houses. Never happened, so we're just living out of the hardened accommodation that I think was over on the east side near the terminal. My memory's a little bit vague now. But great fun. The first time in particular with 43 Squadron Phantoms, we were up there in 87. We found Sundays quite interesting because in those days, and it may not have changed, the people of Stornoway and the Lewis had traditional Sundays, is what we'll say. So that was a little bit of an adjustment for us. But the flying was great when the weather was decent, so really enjoyed it. And certainly the people on the airport were very keen to see us. Don't know about the status of Stornoway now, whether it still be used. Not sure on that one. Right, back to MKMD, the Raspberry Ripple. was always talked about on Facebook with the reverse bug. Yeah, I knew several of the display pilots, but I think the Raspberry Ripple was principally with Fred Grundy, Freddie the fighter pilot, and he had his navigator was Martin Parker, who's a good friend of mine. Yeah, again, reverse thrust, going to muck up that color scheme. So they tended to do the flashy aerodynamic landing, which was to hold the nose off as long as possible, and much like the F-15s do routinely, but they've got a great big barn door of a wing to slow them down. The F3's wing's not that big, so it's more show rather than effectiveness, but it does mean that the thrust reverse spares the paint scheme on the fin. Yeah. Jen, can you describe any DACT experiences that are memorable, especially where the Tornadoes prevailed against more capable fighters? It took us a while to get there because, yes, the F3, when it came into service, was not in the shape that it shouldn't have been. That it should have been. The radar wasn't there. When we started to maneuver visually against other aircraft, we were asking the aircraft to do something it wasn't designed to do. It was not designed as a dogfighter. It was designed as a standoff interceptor, a job which it did very well. But very quickly, that particular role became subordinate to what else was going on in the world. The Gulf War I, the Balkans War, the moving on into the Gulf War II. We're not in a situation of being able to stand off and lob missiles from a distance. We would have to expect to maneuver, and in all heights. So now we had to work hard. Whereas 15s, 16s, 18s, and on the other side, 29s and Su-27s going on to the 30 series, they were very maneuverable, and they had missiles that were at least as capable and very soon more capable than us. So we had to work hard, but we did eventually get there. We got to a stage where we had some respect. Not easy, but we had to do it. Principally, we did most of it in the NATO area, so with NATO countries, the Dutch, the Danes, the Belgians, and I think they had to adapt their tactics as well to deal with something like the F3, because they were thinking it's going to be coming in fast in straight lines and dead easy to pick off, much like F-104s from way back. But eventually, we managed to start getting results, but it was coming from a bit of guile and a bit of trickery, not breaking the rules, but two heads working together to come up with a bit of razzle dazzle. If we walked straight in like the Americans did, like a gunfighter going down the high street, saying, "I'm here, what are you going to do about it?" we would never have won. We would have, to put it in that analogy, we would have been coming down the side, hiding round the back of the stables, and then coming in the side when he couldn't see us and taking the pot shot. Hey, kill's a kill. And we would have all sorts of maneuvers and tactics like that, basically to defeat the situational awareness of the opponents. And while they are kind of scratching their heads or resetting back because they don't understand, we would try and take advantage of that. So the last thing we would want to be involved in is something that we called a knife fight in a telephone box, which is exactly what the F-16 and the F-18 wanted to be. They wanted to be in close, in your face, with the short-range missiles, and the MiG-29 was exactly the same. That was bad news for us, and if we ever got ourselves in there, the first and top priority for us would be to think, how the hell do we get out of it? So we would be looking to extricate ourselves from the fight, although as much as we would like actually maneuvering hard in combat, it's not really where the F3 wanted to be. And to be realistic, it was a skill that we looked on as a last ditch, keep yourself alive, to get yourself out of it, rather than, hey, let's go in and mix it close in. The real strength of the F3 was from range, and that was amplified by the improvements to the radar and the coming of the AMRAAM missile, the AIM-120, as opposed to the Skyflash that we started life with. So we did plenty of DACT, and you come down absolutely soaked, and it'd be great fun. People would ask me frequently, well, how long could an F3 fuel last you? Well, I could make one, if we don't have tanks on, so a clean fit F3, I could make it last nearly 2 hours. But wouldn't be doing very much. We'd be going up and down, cruising along, typical, equating to the car of driving like 56 miles an hour to get best fuel consumption. Or on a combat mission, I could be emptying the tanks in 20 minutes. So there's the difference, 2 hours, 20 minutes. It was great fun, but it's not really where the F3 wanted to be. So we concentrated on making sure we could fight on our terms, which was more arm's length. And moving down, could the F3 drop bombs too? That's Smedley. No, is the short answer. We were never configured for ordnance like that. It was all air-to-air stuff, with one exception, and that was the gun. We had a single 27mm Mauser, whereas the GRs initially had two. And ours was actually mounted slightly nose, with respect to the nose, upwards, because we were thinking we'd need to take lead against an airborne target, whereas the GRs were actually mounted slightly nose down, because they would be firing at the ground. It then came in that they decided that the F3 could potentially become involved in helping ground forces, not as a primary mission, but as a backup, as a help. We've got people pinned down. Can you come and help us? So we started to develop the skill of strafing. So that's really about the only time that I deliberately fired at a ground target, and it was with 27mm rounds, so not bombs. Mr. Johnson, a friend of mine who's about a quarter of a mile away from where I'm sitting, when the fleet was retired early, how much life was left in the jets? Could they have continued in service? Yeah, kind of touched on that earlier. Yes, the fatigue life was definitely being managed, and we could have gone on for several more years if the political will and the money was available. And there were several roles that I've touched on, particularly the EF3, that it could have fulfilled very, very well, but there were other forces at play there. Back to Jin. Could you deploy the flaps to maximize the turn performance of the F3? Yes, and depending on how much flap you put down depends on what happened. I've already hinted earlier, talked about maneuver devices. The leading edge slats and about, this is where memory's going, there's about 10 degrees of flap could be deployed on via my thumb on the throttle, up and down, a little cocked hat on the inside of the throttle. And I could pop that down and it would just give me a little bit more lift without too much drag penalty, and we'd use it all the time when maneuvering hard. And it had no real speed limitations in terms of deploying it. There was a drag limitation if you were trying to accelerate, and then they would automatically be retracted if you left them down and you brought the wings back, because you can imagine if the flaps were down slightly and then the wings are coming back, there's going to be a physical conflict with the side of the fuselage, and it wouldn't end well. So the system automatically brought the maneuver flap back up again. If you had mid flap or full flap, which is what you would use for landing, you couldn't bring the wings back because they wouldn't retract, and it would stop the edges of the flaps puncturing the sides of the fuselage. So mid flap in combat could give you quite a lot of turning and bring your radius down quite a lot. You had to be slow though, because there was a speed limit on the flaps. So now your energy levels are low, and you really put yourself into a cul-de-sac. And the only time I would do that is when I'm trapped, I can't get out the fight, but there's help coming. The cavalry is coming over the hill. So what I have to do now is not be shot. I'm going to have to try and stay there as long as I can and not be shot. So putting the flap down is a bit like planting the flag in the middle and circle the wagons. and the Indians are going round the outside. You're not going anywhere. But it's a last-ditch manoeuvre. So yes, we could, but under very particular circumstances and very, very carefully, to be honest. Back to James again. Talk to us about low-level performance. How did it compare to the other aircraft of the 90s? The Tornado F3 was the fastest ship around at low level. The F111 could probably stay with it, but that was about it. And whenever I took passengers up, that was one of the Hollywood moments. The low-level acceleration, even to the last time I did it, after 21 years on the jet, still impressed 7 bells out of me. It was brilliant. It's like going on to level 7 of a video game. Start at 250 feet, 350 knots, plug in the burners, there's the kick, and then the world just started going past. And I was just waiting on the light streaks that you get from Millennium Falcon on the Star Wars. I'm not exaggerating. It was brilliant. And before the engines were detuned, and there's stories behind that, 800 to 850 knots at low level was quite achievable, and nothing stayed with you. I should point out about 760 knots at low level is Mach 1. So we're well through the sound barrier. We're about 1.2, depending on the day, something like that, at 250 feet. One of the funniest things were that the Buccaneers back in the 80s, their standard technique to get away from Phantoms was to go down to 50 feet and go as fast as they could, which was about 550 to 600 knots. And generally, they would get away from Phantoms doing that. I took great delight, one of the first missions I did against Buccaneers, of going past a Buccaneer in cold power, i.e. not in reheat, and just waving at them. And they were astounded. That was their tactic gone. They say, you're not escaping from the F3. It was fantastic at low level. Oh,
Hi Roy, can you hear me? I think we lost you there. Yeah, your audio seems to have gone there, Roy. Bear with us, guys. I'm sure we can get Roy back up. Yeah, there's no sound. We can see you fine, but yeah, no sound. Let us know in the comments there if you can hear Roy audio-wise, but I've lost him on my end, but maybe it's okay for you. Yeah, audio is gone there, Roy. Did you mute your mic there, Roy, just in case? Or even on Skype? No, we can't hear you. Yeah, bear with us, folks. Let's see. What can I do on my end here? Let's see. can you hear me, folks? Or is my end so far? Yeah, just not you. Okay. The only thing I can think of, Roy, is have you got yes? So Skype is unmuted. All right. Yeah, cheers, Mike, in the comments there. Yeah, so my audio's okay. The only thing, Roy, is if you go to your settings, I'm not sure if you're on Windows or Mac, but if you go to sound maybe and make sure you're on whatever mic you're using, if it's internal or if you have a desk mic. There it is here. So, folks, you'll have to bear with my ugly mug here while I try and figure something out. Yeah. Audio was all perfect before, so I'm not sure what's happened there.
1, 2, 3. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, say that again, Roy.
1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, you're tiny bit quiet on your end, but I can hear you now.
Let me just check the settings here.
Yeah, no problem.
Microphone. I went to Windows settings and it appeared to be muted for some reason. What I'll do, I'm not sure if I can make it any louder than that.
No, that's fine for me. Is the sound all good for you guys in the comments? Just let us know.
I can just talk louder for what we've got left.
There we go. Yeah, we can all hear you.
Okay.
Roy, would you be happy to go on for maybe like till 8:15 just to?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just scrolling back to see where I can pick up.
Yeah, no problem.
I know where I was. Oh gosh, there's a lot of questions.
There's a lot of questions.
Oh, MKMD, quick one. Going to the toilet routine in a flight suit, especially on cap over hostile territory. Oh, words. Yeah, we had something called a piddle pack. Basically, that was a plastic bag with a one-way valve and a dehydrated sponge inside. Worked well. Little bit of contortion to make it work, but I had to use it several times. If you had another problem, there wasn't any other option. But I did have no names, but it was an exchange navigator from another country who was caught short, and he managed to use his flying glove. I had to go on to 100% oxygen while while things were happening, but it's a fairly serious situation. But for in terms of needing to take a piss, the piddle pack worked well. So there we go. How good was the climb rate of the Tornado compared to the Phantom? Pretty similar. I would say they were pretty much the same. Nothing compared to the Lightning, but in terms of climb rates for between the two airframes, about the same. Back to Jin again. Could you induce inadvertent wing damage by manually sweeping the wings forward at too high an airspeed? Yes. Short answer there. Definitely. Exactly the same as trying to drive too fast in too low a gear in the car. Gearbox and engine don't like it. Back to James. Was there ever any plans to re-engine the F3 with something other than the RB199? For the first Gulf War, we had modified RB199s, 106s, with bigger fans, which gave an increase in thrust. But they were borrowed from the Germans, and they went back to the Germans after the first Gulf War. We did look at EJ200s, particularly when the Typhoon program was sliding. I was on the OEU at the time, so we could ask these questions. The basic problem was the mounting points on the EJ200s were different to the RB199s, where they bolt onto the frames. So there would be quite extensive modifications to the mainframe and the fuselages to make it work. And that meant money, and so it was a non-starter. So much as we'd like it, it wasn't going to happen. The Freckle Bunny, how good was the AOA in the Tornado, and how much better was it than in the Phantom? Well, AOA is AOA. We had good indications in the Tornado, so we knew what AOA we were at, but pretty much it was very similar. And 19 units was the magic number. It was the magic number in the Phantom, and it was pretty much the magic number in the F3. Go above 19 units, and you're going to be bleeding energy and not turning as well. So really, you're getting in towards stall territory. So the numbers actually equated fairly similar. Lower AOA when we're landing the aircraft on final approach, whereas the Phantom came in at 19 units all the way and basically landed on the runway like a sack of potatoes because it was designed to land on a carrier. You didn't flare it, but with the F3, you actually could flare it and bring it down quite happily. But AOA ruled everything because AOA was our basically how quickly are we expending energy is based on what AOA you were pulling. David Boardman, would the RAF be better with the F14 not the F3? That's been discussed a lot. I personally like the F14, but we're getting into politics in terms of would we just buy American from the word go, or from the 1980s onwards, F-15s, F-14s, F-18s, and not bother. We could have done, but I'll tell you now, if we'd done that, where Wharton Aerodrome is now, it would be a housing estate because British Aerospace wouldn't exist. So you've got the political inputs to whether UK wanted to maintain an independent military aircraft industry. As platforms, yeah, the Phoenix missiles were something extraordinary. Not all killers, not death rays. Don't get me wrong. And we're only really getting beyond the Phoenix with the new Meteor missiles that are coming for the Typhoons. But it was a fairly capable platform, so yeah, I like it. Haven't answered your question really. Would I have taken a 14 against a 3? I would like to have had an exchange tour. I'll settle for that. Jen, is there a checklist, standard operating procedures for asymmetric wing sweep of the F3? No. Can't really remember getting asymmetric. And if it happened, you're pretty much going to be throwing the jet away. It ain't going to fly. We did have, for real, and we practiced frequently, landing the aircraft with the wings not at 25 degrees, i.e. fully forward. And you just have to come in faster. You come in like an F-104 used to do. So we used to practice that a lot, and we did have failures at times. But asymmetric, never heard it happen, probably wouldn't fly, to be honest. What was my back to the Freckle Punny? What was my most memorable intercept? Well, I've done many, but it has to be the first time that I intercepted a Russian aircraft. That was back in the Phantom. It was a Friday, 1987 sometime. Got launched out of Q at Lookers in the old shed, and we were up and we got 2 Bear Charlies and a Bear Delta. About 4.5 hours back home, tea and medals. And the first time I came up alongside this Bear Charlie, a huge aircraft, could hear the engines roaring, guns in the tail pointed upwards, although our RWR was making some funny noises. And we could see guys in the blisters and windows looking at us. And that brought it home to me. That's short of war. This is what I was to do. This is my job. In a fully armed Phantom, about 100 miles north of Stornoway. Stornoway. And looking at the Russians and a big red star on the tail. It was It was brilliant. It's routine. It's been routine for people before. It's been routine for people after. But that's probably my most memorable, doing it for the first time. Jin's asking what was my favourite activity, killing time while waiting on QRA. Tomb Raider. Yeah, we had Xboxes and PlayStations and what have you. So we've quite quickly got bored of watching videos, etc. So it was usually computer games. That was it. Doesn't matter what age you are. Doesn't change. Yeah. Have I played DCS yet? That's Yogi asking this. I'm not sure what DCS is, so I'll have to pass on that one. Yep. Do I still remember how to start those planes from cold and dark? Right now, if you asked me to just spiel it out now, I'd have to say no. It's 11, 12 years since I last did it. I would hopefully, if I got into it and sat down, it would all come back. But it's one of those things like anything, you've got to keep at it. And, the older you get, brain gets a bit tired and you start to lose it. So right now, I'd be struggling. But it would be interesting if I climbed back into the cockpit, how it would look. Have I ever had to land at a divert airstrip? Frequently. Yeah, it happens. Don't plan to do it, but it has happened. I can relate it back to talking about the Phantom, if the F3 having wing sweep being stuck fully back. Happened one Friday afternoon. It seems to happen on a Friday afternoon at Lookers. Friday afternoon or Friday lunchtime, one of the guys we're operating with was going to land with the wings back at 67, which is a bit of a drama. He did it successfully, went into the overrun cable, because he was too fast for the approach end. He would have snapped it or damaged the aircraft. So he had to land, run down the runway, and hope that the hook would take the overrun cable and stop him before he ended up heading towards Balmullo. He did, but the firemen were going to take a long time to get the aircraft off the runway. And I was sitting there looking in the overhead, watching my fuel gauge go down and down and down. Eventually I said, "We're on our way to Edinburgh, I'm afraid." "What? No, you can't. We'll get it." "No, sorry. Fuel says if we don't go now, we're not going anywhere." So we're off to Edinburgh. But yes, I've been into Newcastle. I've been into Manchester, stuck there for 3 days. Funny, you never go to really exotic places to be divert, but yeah, been to a few. Brockwell's asking, didn't ever drop your external fuel tanks, or will that only happen in dogfights? I have never had to punch tanks off. We flippantly refer to them as keep tanks because the engineers would get really upset if you didn't bring your tanks back. And there's loads of funny stories of people losing their tanks inadvertently, navigators not understanding what that button was or being given an instruction poorly about which button to press, pressing the button, and suddenly the tanks have gone. There's an F3 from 23 Squadron lost its tanks getting airborne on 1-6, which is the one that the Leeming runway is parallel to the A1, so you're heading south. Got airborne, touched the emergency jettison with his thumb. It was a hair trigger, and the two big 2250 litre tanks, off they went and buried themselves in a field just by the A1. That was interesting. But other guys have done it, and you would look to, if we're getting into a visual manoeuvring fight, not the long range, but we're talking about the knife fight in the telephone box, yeah, the tanks would go. Yeah, you'd be short of gas, but do you know what? You need the performance to turn, so that's the important thing. James asking, when tanking, which was the preferred tanker for me? Victor, VC10 or TriStar? I thought the easiest one to refuel from was the VC10. I liked refueling off the wing hoses. Very stable. Had to trim a bit strange to keep the aircraft stable, but that was my favourite. The best tanker for when we were travelling somewhere was the TriStar, because it had loads of gas and it had your engineers on board. So when we all landed, if there was any problems, they could sort it out. The problem with the TriStar as a tactical tanker was it has one hose. So it is a traffic jam. And if we're ever going up to the tanker and we're a bit short of gas, and you find out, oh, it's a TriStar, and there's 3 on the wing waiting. You go, oh, no, this is going to be ugly, because we're all wanting gas and only one at a time. Whereas when you get something like the VC10, you can cycle through. And in days before, the Victor as well, 2 wing hoses was great. KC10s, most of them have wing hoses as well, so that's good. But the TriStar was good for getting you from A to B on a deployment or something like that. So, but I loved air-to-air refueling. It didn't get any easier with time, but I enjoyed it.
So, Roy, just before you move on, how much time could we have you for? Because I'm guessing you're a busy man, but how much longer could you go on for?
I can go on for as long as you want. My throat's getting a little bit tired, but I'm not under any time pressure. It's purely you guys.
Just because
And
there's so many questions, would you be
try.
happy to go on till about maybe half 8? Just because there's so many
Yep,
questions, Roy, coming
I
in.
can do this. I could. I'll maybe just jump down a few just to give people a chance that are coming in late, because there's quite a few people who have put up multiple questions.
Yep.
Uh, Although I'm just going past Brocco's question about did I ever land at RAF Machrihanish? Yes, but in the tutor, would you believe? Not in one of the fast jets. I never had an exercise down there that required me to land at Machrihanish, but we used it out of Ugsas, Campbelltown Airport as it's known now, for circuit training. So yeah, I have been to Machrihanish. Strange place, because the way the hills are set, you can have the wind coming offshore at both ends of the runway. So you've got a tailwind no matter what end of the runway you're at. That kept the students interested. Um, Gaza 29, would you have liked to have been part of the F3 display team? Uh, yeah, I never tried for it. And it was the moment you become a family man, the F3 display team, like Battle of Britain Memorial Flight, like the Red Arrows, all the rest of it, most of your weekends are gone. And was that something I could really do? I'm not sure. I'm not sure. So it was never really high in my priorities. Didn't try it, um, but it certainly would get you to some interesting places. That's for sure. James is asking any accidental weapon or tank releases I can tell you about. Weapons. Well, it was a Phantom Squadron at Lookers that wasn't 43 Squadron. QRA. They got well out of position. The RAF Phantoms had very poor navigation equipment, particularly the FG1s. And these guys were a lot further west than they thought they were. And when they turned round and they put the radar out to maximum range, expecting to see the Outer Hebrides, and there was nothing there, they kind of panicked a bit and they dropped all their weapons and their tanks. They eventually made it back. I think they got into Lossiemouth, or did they divert to Keflavik? Can't remember, but that was one time when there was 8 missiles and 3 tanks went into the Atlantic. And there was one famous story on 43 with guys carrying tanks, 3 tanks, centerline tank as well. They were doing an affiliation sortie against the Buccaneers, and the Phantom they were in was an ex-Navy one, and the Navy ones. To go back to a question way back, I know we're talking about the F3. They did have a ground attack role. They had a strike role. They carried things that we referred to as special weapons. You guys would call them buckets of instant sunshine. To do that, there was interlocks between the 2 members of the crew to prevent one person deciding that they were going to drop a nuke. So there was various switches you had to be made. Now, when they came to the RAF, all those switches were redundant. All the circuitry was sealed and isolated. There was one switch in the back that the navigator made. It was always wire locked off, that put a caption on the front that said nav consent. And it was the last switch the navigator would make to the pilot to say, yeah, I agree that we will drop the special weapon. And this particular day, he was playing with it because it wasn't wire locked off. So he's just throwing the switch backwards and forwards. It was actually putting the caption on in the front cockpit. So the front seater said, hang on, what are you doing? Explained, right, leave it switched on, because if I do this, and he put his hand down to the redundant air to ground weapon selector, rotated it round, pulled a catch and selected special weapon, and then hit the pickle button. He says, I've just dropped a nuke. Bang. What was that? That was a centre line tank. It's gone. It can't be. It bloody has. And they blew the tank off. It shouldn't have happened, but it was wiring mods on wiring mods, stray wires, stray wiggly amps, and they managed to blow the centre line tanks off. So they were very sheepish when they came back to the squadron, and the squadron boss summarised it by saying it's just two 10-year-old boys playing with a box of matches. And that was it. So that's how they lost their tank. Right, where we go. Bill's asking me, hairiest moment in the RAF. Yeah. Valley, going through training in a hawk, and basically I lost vision. We're in loose formation with my leader, and we're doing a loop, and I lost visual with them as we went over the top. So I rolled wings level, scanning about, and then something made me look up, and the leader aircraft is coming inverted down on top of me. I just had enough time to go to full power and just waited on the collision. I felt the pressure wave of his nose passing between my tailplane and the trailing edge of my wing. And he's gone. And it's one of those moments where it's finished. Fly the aircraft. Did it really happen? Yep, I was probably within 2 feet of having a mid-air collision and probably not being here today. So there we go. I got away with it. 9 lives, don't know how many I've used. Again, just jumping down a bit so I can catch up. Alexander's asking, did you get to fight German MiG-29s? Personally, I didn't, although I saw them through my time on the Operational Evaluation Unit, but they started to get involved in TLP, Tactical Leadership Programme, the NATO equivalent of Red Flag-ish. I think it's out of Florence. It was in my day. You guys will know where it is. It was in Jever, then Florence in Belgium. Don't know where it is now. Might be still there. And they joined in at that point. So there's plenty of my colleagues did. Personally speaking, I didn't. Did see them fly. Very smoky engines. Worse than the J79s. God, you can see them miles away. And a little bit like the Lightning, short of gas. So you get them turning, and very quickly they're having to bug out for home because their fuel levels are low. So that was interesting. Right, I'm now getting past all the bit where everybody says I am now unmuted or muted and the audio's gone. Ding, 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 ding. He's not travelling fast enough. Right, there we go. Still going past all the chat about where we go. Mr. Watson, another friend of mine. First thoughts went through your head, your first QRA sweeping up in the Bear. I've answered your question there, David. It was impressive. And was probably my most memorable intercept, as I've said. Jay Ocean asking, in CAS missions, what kind of tactics generally used by the F4? I was just shot down by a Samwell bombing in War Thunder. CAS, I never got involved in the F4. So I can only really talk about what we did in the F3. And it was very much stay high for as long as possible, depending on what's going on. And again, CAS for us in the F3 was very much a secondary mission, almost a urgent standby emergency types rather than a declared mission. So my knowledge is not going to be high. But what sort of things could we get involved with? Well, we have worked quite a bit with the hooligans from Hereford and their work as forward air controllers. And so they'd be calling us down to hit particular targets, whether they are pinned down by a group of enemy forces or whatever. It would probably be that sort of scenario rather than a predetermined, in we go, we're going to take a target out. We probably wouldn't get involved in that. The other, and again, it's all strafing. That's all we're talking about. The other thing, or the other major target that became a player in the Balkans War and was most certainly a factor in Gulf War II was helicopters. And we did a lot of work with our helicopter force, developing tactics for them to avoid fighter interception and survive, and us to detect, intercept, and shoot down helicopters. And that is not nearly as easy as it sounds, but that could be very challenging. And again, staying high for as long as possible, down when we had to either make an identification or make the attack, and then get the heck out of it, because certainly below 10,000 feet, it could be shark infested custard. A question here: what was the EEL's AOA? Are you talking about the F3's AOA? I'm not sure on that one. I'm just going to pass over to carry on a bit. NI, did I ever bring the F3 to Northern Ireland for any events in the area or at Aldergrove? No, I never got the chance. And certainly early days, we were discouraged from flying over Northern Ireland. Why? It's airspace, but the political side. Certainly not at low level, but even at medium level, we could have, but we didn't. It was frowned on. That's all I'll say on that. So, yeah, shame. Thank you very much on my retirement from Rolly. Thank you. Gaza, Friday tea time, QRA scrambles, Coningsby. Yes. I don't know if you're referring to one in particular, but there was one Friday tea time QRA scramble where it wasn't a live scramble, it was an exercise to deal with a hijacked aircraft, simulated. And it was at Friday evening, in fact. It was, and I'll tell you the exact date because it's significant, November the 5th, the Friday. And we got involved because Coningsby we're going to take it on, but they had a problem with one of their aircraft. So I was on QRA up at Lucas that day, and we got involved. It was supposed to be a Boeing 747 from British Airways, but they chickened out at the last minute. So it was the QRA tanker, a TriStar, that was acting as the hijacked airliner, and we had to go down and get involved in it. And the reason I remember the November the 5th, I remember saying to my navigators, we went past Newcastle, looking down, it was clear night, and I said, God, there's an awful lot of police cars about Newcastle. Now, some of you might think, so what, Friday night, Newcastle? Yeah. But in fact, it was bonfires and fireworks going off. Anyway, digress. We got down, we intercepted the TriStar, and we shadowed it down to the designated airfield, which down there is no secret, it's Stansted. And we got it on the ground. It taxied around, got airborne again, and went to Bryce Norton. We went home, and then the exercise shifted to the ground frame at Stansted, where the hooligans from Hereford came over and got involved in their bit. So otherwise, Friday tea time scrambles were bad news. What was the most common loadout you flew on the Tornado? It was 4x4, so 4 Skyflash, 4 Sidewinders, laterally 4 A120 Bravos, then upgraded to Charlies, and the ASRAM, M132 ASRAM, which was a very potent missile, and the one gun, of course. Defensive aids and stuff like that, depending on the role and the area we're in. Chaff and flares, yeah, could be TRA, the towed radar decoy, which again was a very effective defensive aid. So I did that. People saying thanks, no bother. Right, how would the Tornado fare in modern BVR combat if armed with Meteors or AMRAAMs? Well, the AMRAAMs, very well, but that's just one component. The Fox Hunter radar in the end was a very capable radar. Yep, blue circle stories right back at the beginning, valid. What we had in 2008 was a very, very capable radar. We had an excellent RHWR and we had data link. So we had the knowledge and we had the AMRAAM and we could actually kick arses, and it was good. It was good. The Meteor would take that out by a factor of some, and we can't go into numbers here. But what the Typhoon has now got is very impressive. So I would have been quite happy quite happy. Nick is asking if the balloon had ever went up and the F3 had to do its Cold War job intercepting red bombers, how would it have done? I think it would have done very well, because we were set up in the Cold War scenario. We were set up. We had our fighter controllers, airspace battle managers, or are they fighter controllers again? Whatever title they have these days, they're fighter controllers to me. They were in their bunkers. We had the radar network. We could see what was coming on, and if they came round the North Cape, we had the ability, and our tactics were set up to beat them back, a bit like Rorke's Drift and the Zulus coming down the hill. The problem of the F3, and where people slag it off, is you then say, no, you go to Central Europe and go up against MiG-29s and Su-27s and try and take these Frogfoot and the Floggers and what have you out, and you're now asking it to do a job that it wasn't designed for, and we do the best we can. But in its original scenario, as you're asking, Nick, it would have done very well and could stay up. It was very economic if we weren't jazzing the cans, as they say. Yes, James, that is the correct squadron. Let's go. What was the biggest change you noticed in the air-to-ground radar of the Phantom as compared to the Tornado? Well, both of them had very limited air-to-ground, and I didn't really get involved in air-to-ground modes with the Phantom at that stage, because all the RAF Phantoms by that stage had finished air-to-ground by the time I got there. The F3 had a reasonable air-to-ground mode, but we didn't use it to deliver weapons. It was really more for navigation. So really, both of them are pretty much on the peripheral as far as I'm concerned. Chief Haskell's asking, in the case of a hot war, what should have been against Su-29 or Su-27 with the F3? Not quite understanding the question. What should have been against? No, I'll pass on that one, not so sure. Did you ever practice dogfights and tornadoes against Phantoms? What were the results? Yeah, we did in the early days in the workup to the Gulf War I. The Watersham Wing helped us out, and we had DACT, and even at that early stage, we were winning. We were winning because the Tornado S3 was more manoeuvrable than the Phantom in close-in combat, and these were experienced guys that we're going against. Max service ceiling of the Tornado and the Phantom, respectively. Tornado was 50,000 feet. Apparently, it could go higher. The rulebook says 50,000 feet. Engines were pretty miffed at being up there, and you just asked them to do anything out of the ordinary, and they would surge, and they have. Phantoms could go higher than that. I can't remember what the service ceiling was now, to be honest, but it's certainly getting up to 60. And so we're really talking about pressurization problems in the cockpit and stuff like that rather than the airframe. But for the F3, it was 50,000 feet, and you had to work quite hard to get up there. Shuttleworth. Tell us about Shuttleworth. Kick the tires, Red Chippy's one of my chums, is in the syndicate, Drone and Sundry. I just happened to be wearing the t-shirt. Went down there on a visit with the University Air Squadron. Loved it. Great place. First time I'd been there. Very, very impressed. Got to meet the chief test pilot, and we had a great time. Great time. So that's my knowledge of Shuttleworth, I'm afraid, just purely as a guy going in through the door. But I'll go back, certainly. Same guy, Drone and Sundry. As regard Hawks, Chivener in the 80s, when the Navy chap flipped the nose off and had to jump out. Lieutenant Commander Shepherd, I think. Okay, not familiar with that one. I went from Valley to Brodie, which was 1 TWU. Great place. Camp was falling to bits. Took you forever to get there, no matter what part of the country you're travelling from. Brodie was right out in the southwest corner of Wales. People were really, really friendly. Great place. Chivener, just outside Barnstable in Devon. Fantastic. The Air Force had rebuilt the whole station. So from the guard room to the control tower, there wasn't a building on the camp more than 5 years old. So what did we do? We gave it to the Marines. Great stuff. Chivener's nice place. Valley. politics. That's all I'll say. How are we doing? How are we doing? Chris again. F3s and F4s acting as lead, minifighters, mother, director, Hawks, T1As. Yeah. How did it work and was it effective? We call that mixed fighter force operations. From an Englishman, Scotland for the Six Nations next year. Nice one, Chris. Mixed fighter force operations. Yeah. We would feed verbally the information to the Hawks, who would just sit on our wings, and they were a bit like pit bulls on leashes. We'd get close enough, assuming we hadn't been hit by this stage. We'd give them the info as to where the enemy was, try and get their eyes on, and then let the leashes go, and they'd be off with the 9Ls. They would also be deployed close in to the airfields, so almost last ditch before the rapiers. If there were surface-to-air missile units on the airfield, they would be around and try and pick off visually. But it was very much a layered defence. But it was something that certainly in the 80s and early 90s we practiced a lot. Then with the Hawks starting to be the size of the fleet retracting, the nature of the enemy forces that we potentially could go against, they just said, no, we'll stop doing it now. So it kind of went into abeyance. Yeah, James, Neil, I live by Nellis Air Force Base. All the flights driving me crazy. Yeah, great place. Oh yes, Nellis, near Las Vegas. Real bummer that. Real bummer. There we go. David, departing the fix. Nice to talk with you. And I again, can you explain a bit about Link 11, Link 16, and etc. etc. Yeah, there's going to different link numbers. There was a link 4, etc. And basically, it was just that's the computer language that's being used there. I'd mentioned JTIDs. That's the kind of hardware that we were using, and JTIDs were using Link 16. So it's a bit like a PC, and we're using Windows 10. That's how it worked. On top, and so different systems had different capabilities in terms of information that could be transferred to whom, by whom, and what you could see. Link 16 was very, very, and is very, very impressive. It has a navigation element to it, which is kind of relevant now for the Typhoon and latterly for the Tornado F3s, because we had laser ring gyro INs with GPS integration. So we're airliner accuracy in terms of our navigation. But the Link 16 JTIDS network could give you that as well. But the biggest thing was two things. We could see all our other players, all our mates on our tactical displays at night, in cloud, wherever, 5 miles behind us, 20 miles behind us. We can see exactly where they are and they can see us. That is a major, major step forward in your situational awareness. What you can then do is any targets you pick up on the radar, you can, by choice, either do it automatically or you can do it selectively, send it out on the net so everyone else can see what you're seeing on your radar. Again, big step forward in situational awareness. You take the E3, and the E3 can put its radar picture out on the net, and that's frightening because you now see everything. You look at it's like Flight Radar 24, and you go, oh my god, and that could be overloading. But what you then have the ability to do is use sensors that are not in the immediate area to feed a picture to give you a better situational awareness. So the Link 16 JTIDs, data link, let's just call it data link, fantastic step forward. And if they're taking it for, I don't know now, but I'm sure they're developing even more capable versions of it for Typhoon and the F-35 and Tempest, etc., etc. Connectivity is the way ahead for everybody, and no changes in the air. Fantastic.
So I'm just going to jump in here, Roy. So if you want maybe answer 2 more questions, and I think we're going to wrap up this Q&A because I know you need a drink of water because your throat's getting sore.
Right. Here's a name I haven't spoken about before. Siggy Driver. Do the engines RB199 need a run-up before takeoff, as they always seem to do that than engaged unlike the Typhoons. Yet there was a reason for that, and that was we would run them up to dry power for 30 seconds. We would then take the temperatures of the jet pipe temperature, the internal temperature of the engine, and the RPM that we were achieving. And the nav would record that and would hand it to the engineers. It was a bit like doing an ECG on the engine, because if those figures started to change, the engineers could predict a failure in the engine, maybe a blade cracking or something, a turbine on the way out or something like that. So it was purely preventative maintenance. For QRA or to get all that, we didn't have to do it. We could do it exactly like the Typhoons. That was the reason we did it. They discovered if they had those figures, they could head off trouble at the pass. So there we go. Okay, one more. See if I can find. And it's Drone and Sundry. There's a great picture of that hawk with the Navy chap's feet hanging out as he went for an inspection flypast. Not sure if it's on the web. Okay, that was that. It was 151 scored apparently. Okay, I think I've hit the end of the questions, and definitely my throat's starting to crack.
Brilliant. Well, Roy, thank you very much for coming on for a bit extra time there. We really appreciate it. And thank you to everyone who's joined us in the comments there. And hopefully Roy's answered your questions. But Roy, thank you very much for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Brilliant. Thanks. And I hope everybody's enjoyed it. Thanks very much indeed.
Absolutely.
Cheers then.